The television was the only light in the room. I hadn't turned it on for company. I hadn't turned it on at all. The woman in the next unit must have had hers up loud enough that the signal bled through the thin wall, and somewhere between exhaustion and sleep. The sound had pulled me back awake. My clothes were still damp. My left hand was wrapped in gauze someone had applied in a hurry, and my knees ached in the specific way they ache when you've been kneeling on wet concrete in 20-degree weather. The motel room smelled like bleach and old carpet. The lamp on the nightstand had a shade that tilted at a permanent angle, like it had given up trying to be straight. It was 12:24 in the morning. Christmas morning, technically. My phone was buzzing on the bed beside me. Not once, not twice, continuously. Numbers I didn't recognize. A voicemail from someone named Lena Crawford at Channel 9. Another from a radio producer. 3 from people whose names I hadn't thought of in years. I picked up the phone to silence it, and then I looked at the television. A woman in a red winter coat was climbing through the shattered rear window of an SUV. The vehicle was tilted at a steep angle, its front end already beneath dark water. Snow blew sideways across the screen. The woman's hands moved fast, deliberate. Someone was handing her a child through the opening. I stared. Even before the camera caught her face, my face I already knew. That was me. The phone buzzed again, this time. The name on the screen was different from all the others. Thomas. I answered on the 3rd ring. For a moment. He didn't speak. All I heard was his breathing. Quick, uneven, nothing like the calm, certain voice I had built a life beside for 22 years. Then, barely above a whisper, "Karen, why are you on every channel?" I looked at the television, at the woman in the red coat, at the black water below her. "It's a long story," I said. But the truth is, it wasn't. The story was actually very short. 6 hours earlier, I had been parked 2 houses down from my own home, watching my husband laugh through the living room window, and I had turned around and walked away without knocking. That was the whole story. Everything else, the river, the broken glass, the little girl's arms around my waist, that was just what happened when a woman with nowhere to go decided to be useful instead. Let me take you back 3 days, to the phone call that started everything. 3 days before Christmas. The house still looked like it always had. The tree was up the same artificial one we'd used for 15 years. Its branches slightly uneven because I always fluffed them by hand, and Thomas always said nobody would ever notice the difference, and I always said the same thing back. "I'll know." For most of our marriage, those small exchanges had been enough. The shorthand of 2 people who knew each other's rhythms so well that whole conversations happened in 4 words. I was 45. Thomas was 4 years older. We'd been married long enough that I could finish his grocery list from memory, and he could set a coffee cup in front of me exactly 3 minutes after my alarm went off. But somewhere in the last few years, the shorthand had become a substitute for something longer. I had left my position as a hospital financial coordinator 7 years earlier to care for my mother after her stroke. We both agreed it would be temporary. 1 year became 2, 2 became 5. By the time my mother passed away 18 months ago, returning to work had become something we talked about in the future tense, someday, eventually, when things settled down. Meanwhile, Thomas had been promoted. Regional operations director. Longer hours, travel, client dinners that ran past 10 on weeknights. His world kept expanding. Mine had grown strangely quiet. I wasn't resentful. I want to be clear about that. I was proud of him. I only wished, sometimes, that his eyes lit up when he looked at me the way they lit up when he talked about a deal closing. The call came on the 22nd. I was in the dining room wrapping gifts when my phone buzzed on the table. "Hey," I answered, smiling, tucking the phone against my shoulder to keep folding ribbon. His voice sounded distracted, like someone talking while reading an email at the same time. "Are you home? Where else would I be? I need to tell you something." I set the ribbon down. "What happened?" "My boss, Robert Harding." He paused. "You remember I mentioned he might stay in Indianapolis for the holidays this year?" I remember. Well, he and Carol are coming for Christmas Eve. I smiled. That's wonderful. I'll make the standing rib roast instead of the ham. Robert mentioned he likes... I was actually thinking. That phrase, whenever someone begins a sentence that way, they're hoping you'll finish it for them, like the thinking has already been done, and what they actually need is your permission. I didn't offer it. I was thinking it might be better, Thomas said slowly, if you weren't here that evening. I was sure I had misheard him. The furnace had just kicked on. The refrigerator was humming. I'm sorry. It's a professional evening, Karen. Robert is more of a client now than a boss. He wants something relaxed. I'm your wife. I know. I host dinner parties. It's something I just don't want anything to feel awkward. Awkward? That word landed somewhere between my sternum and my spine and stayed there. After 22 years of marriage, I had become awkward. I don't understand, I said softly. It's one night, he exhaled. I'll pay for a hotel, somewhere nice. I'll make sure you're comfortable. Somewhere nice? He wasn't asking me to visit my sister. He wasn't suggesting I spend the evening with a friend. He was asking me to vacate my own home on Christmas Eve so he could entertain his boss without the inconvenience of his wife being present. Karen, I really appreciate your... When should I leave? I asked. The relief in his pause was more honest than anything he said next. Maybe tomorrow afternoon, before they arrive at 6. Tomorrow, not next week, not after the holiday. Tomorrow. Okay, I said. You understand, right? No. But understanding and accepting aren't the same thing, and I was too tired to explain the difference. I'll figure something out, I told him. He thanked me. Actually, thanked me, as though I had done him a favor. Then the call ended, and I stood in the middle of the dining room listening to the sound of a house that suddenly felt less like mine than it had 10 minutes earlier. The next morning, I packed one small suitcase. Not because I had little to take, because I couldn't decide what still belonged to me. Before closing the zipper, I reached into the closet and pulled out the red wool coat I'd bought 2 winters ago. The one Thomas had once said made me look like someone worth looking at. I put it on. I also pulled out the gift bag sitting on the closet shelf. Inside a watch Thomas had admired through a jewelry store window 4 months ago and promptly forgotten. A leather planner, because he still wrote appointments by hand. A framed photograph from our trip to the Smoky Mountains 11 years earlier, back when weekends still belonged to both of us. I had planned to give them to him after dinner. Now they'd come with me instead. I picked up my suitcase, looked around the living room one last time, and quietly locked the front door behind me. The motel sat just off I-65 past 3 gas stations and a closed-down diner, the kind of place people use when they are passing through, not when home is 20 minutes away. The sign outside blinked between vacancy and VAC_NCY. A plastic Santa leaned against the office door at an angle that suggested he'd had a long year. Inside the room, one bed. One lamp with a crooked shade, one television mounted too high on the wall, and a heater under the window that rattled every time the temperature dropped another degree. I sat on the edge of the bed in my coat because the room hadn't warmed up yet. I laughed once, quietly, for no reason in particular, not because anything was funny. Sometimes your body reaches for laughter because crying would require more energy than you have left. At noon, Thomas texted, "Hope you're settled. Thank you for understanding." I stared at the message for a long time. I thought of several things I could have written back. I could have asked whether Robert Harding knew his employee had asked his wife to leave her own home to make room for a client dinner. I could have asked whether anyone would notice the empty stocking over the fireplace. Instead, I typed 2 words. I'm fine. The most useful lie in a marriage. Short enough to say, easy enough to believe, if the other person doesn't look too closely. By late afternoon, snow had started in earnest. I drove to a shopping plaza because the motel room had started pressing in on me. Most stores were already closing early. Families moved through the parking lot with bags and children in tow, everyone moving with the particular hurried warmth of people who had somewhere to be. I bought a turkey sandwich from a deli near closing time and a carton of tomato soup from the grocery store. The cashier, a young woman with silver nail polish and a Santa hat slightly askew, asked if I had big plans. I almost said yes. Then I said, "Quiet night." She nodded like that sounded lovely. Maybe for some people it was. Back at the motel, I ate on the edge of the bed. The bread was dry, the soup was too salty. I finished both. Because wasting food still felt wrong, even on a night when everything else seemed out of place. By evening, snow was falling steadily outside the window. I turned on the television and stared at it without watching. Holiday movies played on 4 channels. In every one, someone found their way home before the final credits. I turned it off. At 6:30, I opened the gift bag and looked at the things I'd packed. The watch, the planner, the photograph. I looked at them for a long time. Then I picked up my keys. I told myself I wouldn't go home. I told myself I was only driving because the room was too quiet and the walls were too close and the lampshade was at an angle I couldn't stop noticing. I told myself I would drive through town and come back and go to sleep. Instead, I turned onto our street. I slowed to a stop 2 houses down. The front windows of our house glowed warm and amber. 3 cars sat in the driveway, Thomas's black sedan, a silver Audi I didn't recognize, and a dark Range Rover that I knew belonged to Robert Harding because Thomas had mentioned it admiringly 3 weeks ago in a conversation about people who make good investments. Through the window, I could see movement. Thomas stood near the fireplace in the charcoal cable knit sweater I had ordered for him 2 Christmases ago. He had one hand in his pocket, the other wrapped around a wine glass. He was laughing. Not the polite laugh he used at work events, but the real one, open, unguarded, the laugh I had fallen in love with. A tall man with silver hair stood across from him. Robert Harding, I assumed. Carol sat on our sofa, my sofa, with a burgundy throw blanket across her lap. My blanket. The house looked warm, full, complete. Without me. I sat there until my breath had completely fogged the windshield. Then I picked up the gift bag from the passenger seat, stepped out into the snow, and walked carefully up the front path. The wreath I had made in November was on the door. The porch light was on. I had set it on a timer in September and never changed the schedule. I stood on my own porch and listened to the muffled sound of comfortable conversation from inside. For one foolish second, I imagined knocking. Thomas would open the door. He would be startled, maybe embarrassed. Maybe he would step outside and take my hand and say he'd been wrong, that he had made a terrible mistake, that of course she belonged here. Hope can be cruel when it has no evidence to stand on. I set the gift bag beside the door. No note, no accusation, no explanation, just the things I had chosen for him because I knew him, because I paid attention, because that was the kind of wife I had always tried to be. I turned to walk back to my car, and then laughter spilled from inside the house. A woman's laughter. Carol, probably, warm, easy, the kind that fills a room. It wasn't wrong for her to laugh. It still hurt. I made it back to the car without looking through the window again. I sat there for a moment with both hands in my lap. Then I started the engine. I couldn't go back to the motel yet. The thought of that room, the crooked lamp, the rattling heater, the 2 salty soup cartons still in the trash made my chest go tight in a way I didn't want to examine too closely. So I drove. Through neighborhoods bright with lights, past closed storefronts, past a church with candles in every window, through the part of town that looks prettiest in snow, where the streetlights turn everything silver and soft, and you can almost believe the world is simpler than it is. At 8:19, my phone buzzed with a notification from a volunteer network I had joined years earlier when my mother was still alive. A community shelter on the east side needed hands. A water line had frozen. Families were being redirected from a church that had lost heat. Space was tight. All help welcome. I looked at the message. Then I looked at the passenger seat. My purse, an empty coffee cup, no dinner to get home for, no one expecting me anywhere. I typed back 2 words. I can come. The shelter ran out of an old community center on Fletcher Avenue cinderblock walls, a gymnasium that smelled of floor polish, and a lobby that had been converted into something resembling organized warmth. By the time I arrived, volunteers were unfolding cots, stacking blankets, working through a donation pile that had clearly arrived faster than anyone could sort it. A young mother stood near the far wall with a sleeping toddler against her shoulder, swaying slightly the way mothers do when the rocking becomes automatic. An elderly man was having a patient disagreement with a staff member about whether he actually needed a second pair of socks. He did need them. I could tell from across the room. I took off my coat, found the person with the clipboard, and asked where I should start. For the next 2.5 hours. I poured coffee and passed out socks and carried boxes from a storage room down a hallway that was too narrow for boxes that size. I found a set of crayons and a stack of construction paper for 2 little boys who were restless and scared and too young to know how to say so. I helped a teenager fill out a form she didn't understand and couldn't ask her parents about because they were across the room trying to hold themselves together. None of it was dramatic. None of it would make the news. It was just useful. And useful, I had discovered, felt considerably better than unwanted. Around 10:40 things finally settled into a quieter rhythm. The shelter director, a woman named Ruth with tired eyes, capable hands, and a voice built for cutting through chaos, found me refilling the coffee urn and touched my arm gently. "You should head out before the roads get worse." I nodded, though some part of me would have been content to stay until morning, at least here. My presence served a purpose, at least here. No one had asked me to leave. Outside, the cold was immediate and serious. Snow was coming sideways now, not the soft decorative kind, but the kind with intent. I wrapped my scarf tighter and walked to my car. I'd been driving for maybe 12 minutes when I saw the brake lights. A cluster of them, too close together, slowing for something that wasn't a traffic signal. Then I saw the gap in the guardrail. Not a dent, not a scrape. A gap the metal bent outward at a violent angle, as though something had punched through it from the roadside. Then I saw the SUV. Its front end had gone through the barrier and dropped toward the river below. The rear wheels were still on the bank, but barely. The hazard lights blinked in the snow, blurred and strange, like something seen underwater. And the front half of the vehicle was already tilting toward the dark water beneath the bridge. I stopped breathing for exactly 1 second. Then I pulled over, grabbed the emergency flashlight from my glove compartment, and ran. The wind hit hard enough to stagger me as I reached the guardrail. I could hear it now, not screaming exactly, but voices, frightened, compressed, the sounds people make when panic is squeezing the air out of them. My phone was already in my hand. 911. What is your emergency? An SUV has broken through the guardrail on County Road 9 north of the Mill Creek overpass. I was already moving down the embankment. There are people inside. The front end is in the water. Please send someone now. The dispatcher started asking questions. I dropped the phone into my coat pocket without answering. The driver's door wouldn't open. The impact had bent the frame. Inside, a man in his late 50s was pressing his hands flat against the window, his forehead cut, blood running into his eyebrow. A woman in the passenger seat kept reaching for her seatbelt buckle but couldn't get the angle right. Then I heard the voice from the back. Small, terrified. "My brother, he can't get his seatbelt off." I looked through the rear window. 2 children, a boy who looked about 7, listing against the side door at a bad angle, his face pale and frightened. A girl, maybe 10, leaning toward him with both hands on his buckle. The water had already reached the floorboards. A young man appeared beside me, out of breath, his jacket half-zipped. He must have stopped from the car behind mine. "What do we do?" "Call 911 if you haven't, then help me with this door." We pulled together on the rear passenger door. Nothing. The cold had sealed it shut, or the frame was warped. Either way, it wasn't moving. Through the glass, the girl pressed both palms flat against the window. Her mouth was moving. I didn't need to hear the words. Every child says the same thing in that moment. "Help me, please help me, someone help me." The young man ran back to his truck and returned with a tire iron. Stand back. The first swing bounced off. The second left a crack. The third shattered the window into a spray of small cubes that hit the snow like gravel. Cold air and cold water rushed in together. The children cried out. I pushed my arm through the opening, clearing loose glass with my sleeve before reaching inside. Cover your faces, I said. Both of you, hands over your faces. I grabbed the boy first. He was shaking so hard I almost couldn't get a proper hold on him, his small body vibrating with cold and fear, his fingers clutching my coat sleeve with a strength that surprised me. The young man was there. I passed the boy through the opening and he carried him up toward the road. Then I looked at the girl. She hadn't moved. Come on, I said. Come through the window, sweetheart, right now. I'm not leaving her. She was pointing toward the front seats. Her mother. I looked. The driver had managed to get his door open a few inches. Someone outside was helping him from that side. But the woman in the passenger seat couldn't climb over the center console on her own. The angle was wrong. The water was at her knees now. For one impossible second, I saw something in that little girl's face that I recognized. Not her features, not her age. The particular kind of stubborn love that makes ordinary people risk everything. She wasn't going to leave without her mother. I understood that completely. I climbed through the broken window. The freezing water hit my legs immediately, not gradually, all at once, like something reaching up from below to make sure I knew what I was dealing with. Every nerve in my body said out, "Get out now." I ignored them. I reached for the woman's arm. She grabbed back hard, the instinctive grip of someone who has decided to trust a stranger because trust is the only option left. I wedged my shoulder against the back of her seat and pushed while pulling. The physics were wrong. The angle was wrong. Everything about the situation was wrong. The vehicle shifted. "It's moving," someone shouted from outside. I pulled harder. Something gave, whether it was the seat or her coat or the water pressure shifting, something released, and she came free of the passenger seat, and we both lunged toward the broken rear window. The young man's hands were there. Reaching in, he grabbed her arm, then mine. We tumbled out onto the snowy bank together, both of us sliding on wet concrete, landing hard. Behind us, the SUV lurched forward, and then it was gone. The sound it made going under was quieter than I expected, a heavy, resigned settling, then nothing but the wind and the river and somewhere up on the road, distant sirens finally arriving. I sat on the bank in wet clothes and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The first deputy arrived in under 4 minutes. Then fire trucks, then paramedics, then state troopers. Everything shifted into organized chaos, the particular controlled urgency of people trained for exactly this, arriving to take over from people who were not trained for it at all but had done it anyway. Someone wrapped a blanket around the little boy. An EMT crouched beside the driver, checking the cut on his forehead. The girl, the one who had refused to leave, stood next to her mother with both hands wrapped around her mother's arm and showed no sign of letting go. I sat off to one side and let the professionals work. An EMT with a calm voice and a practiced manner crouched in front of me. "Ma'am, your hand is bleeding." I looked down, a long cut across my left hand that I genuinely had not felt happen. "I'm okay. Let's make sure." He guided me toward the ambulance and began cleaning and wrapping the cut while another paramedic checked my blood pressure. "You went into the vehicle," he said. "Yes." "You understand what could have happened?" "Yes." He looked at me for a moment. So do I. A firefighter appeared at my shoulder. "The family wants to speak with you." "They don't have to." They asked. The father came toward me slowly, his forehead bandaged, his children a few feet behind him. He looked at me the way people look at someone when they have no words that feel adequate and know it. "I don't know your name," he said. "Karen." He swallowed. "Karen." He stopped there for a moment like he was doing something with the name, pressing it somewhere he would keep it. "You saved my family." I didn't know how to answer that in a way that felt honest, so I only said, "I'm glad you're all here." Then the girl stepped forward and wrapped both arms around my waist. Her coat was still damp. So was mine. She didn't say anything, just held on. That was the moment that nearly broke me, not because of the water or the cold or the adrenaline finally wearing off, because children don't thank people the way adults do. Adults worry about finding the right words. Children simply tell the truth with their bodies. I put my arms around her and told myself not to cry. Lena Crawford from Channel 9 appeared at the edge of the safe perimeter while the EMT was finishing with my hand. She was professional about it, waited until the medical staff had stepped back, held the microphone at a respectful distance, asked if she could ask one question. I said yes. What made you run toward the vehicle when everyone else was still stopping? I looked back toward the river. The spot where the SUV had been was just dark water now, unbroken, like the vehicle had never existed. I didn't really think, I said. There were children inside. She waited, clearly expecting more. That was all, I said. She thanked me. The whole exchange lasted less than 30 seconds. I walked back to my car, turned on the heater, and sat with my hands in my lap while the shaking slowly stopped. I had no idea the camera had been rolling since I came down the embankment. I had no idea the footage would be on every local station within the hour. And I had absolutely no idea that across town. In a warm living room with a Christmas tree and 2 wine glasses and a dying fire, my husband would look up from dessert and see my face on his television screen. The drive back to the motel took twice as long as it should have. The snow had gotten serious while I was at the river. The highway disappeared under a continuous white sheet, and my windshield wipers worked constantly, pushing flakes aside only to have the next wave arrive immediately behind them. The cut on my left hand stung through the gauze every time I gripped the wheel. Mostly, I just felt tired. Not the movie kind of tired. Not the kind that arrives dramatically on a soundtrack. The quiet kind. The kind that settles in after your body has run on adrenaline for 40 minutes and then suddenly remembers how old it actually is. The motel parking lot was nearly empty. I parked, sat for a moment, then went inside. I stood under the shower until the water had worked through every layer of cold. Then I changed into dry-clothes sweatpants and an old university shirt of Thomas's that I had packed without thinking. Old habits. Some of them leave slowly. I had just sat down on the edge of the bed when my phone lit up. Not once, not twice. Continuously. Unknown numbers. Voicemails. Text messages from people I had not spoken to in years. A message from my sister, Diane. I just turned on the TV. Karen, call me immediately. A message from a woman I'd volunteered beside at a food drive 3 years ago. A message from my old supervisor at the hospital. All of them saying some version of the same thing. We saw you. Are you all right? We're so proud. I set the phone down and reached for the remote. Turned on the television. And there I was. The red coat, the broken window, the dark water behind the SUV. The footage looped from 3 different angles, someone's dash cam, the news crew's camera, and another from a passing driver's phone. It played once, then again. Then again. A local anchor described the scene in the careful, excited voice television uses for stories like this. Then the interview. 30 seconds, my voice, tired and flat, saying exactly what I'd said to Lena Crawford. There were children inside, that was all. My phone buzzed in my hand. Thomas. I looked at his name on the screen for a long moment. He had not called once since asking me to leave 2 days ago. Not to check whether I'd found somewhere comfortable, not to say he was thinking of me, not even a text beyond the one thanking me for understanding. Now he was calling at 12:24 in the morning. I answered. Karen. His breathing was wrong, too fast. Karen, are you... He stopped, started again. Why are you on every channel? It's a long story. I've been trying to reach you for 20 minutes. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Are you hurt? They keep saying the woman went into the water. I'm fine. I have a cut on my hand, but it's already been treated. Silence. Then, muffled, from somewhere behind him, another voice. Robert Harding. Thomas. Even filtered through the phone, I could hear the weight in the name. Did you reach her? Thomas covered the phone. Yes, I did. A pause, then Robert's voice again, quieter, but still audible enough. The woman from the news. Another pause. Is she all right? Yes, Thomas said. A longer pause. Thomas. Robert's voice had changed. The professional warmth had dropped away entirely. Is that your wife? Thomas didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence answered for him. I heard movement on his end, footsteps, a door opening. Then his voice came back clearly. He had moved somewhere private. Karen, I'm here. I'm coming to get you right now. Tell me which motel. I looked around the room. The crooked lamp, the too loud heater, the empty soup carton in the trash. No, I said. Karen, I'm fine, Thomas, I'm going to sleep. I should have never... He stopped. I made a terrible mistake asking you to leave. You made a choice, I said. Those aren't the same thing. Another silence. I wasn't thinking. I know. Can I explain? Not tonight. My voice stayed level, not cold, just settled. Tonight I'm going to sleep. We can talk another time. He exhaled shakily. I've never been more ashamed of myself. I believed him. I want to be clear about that. I believed he meant every word. That didn't change what the words were coming after. More notifications scrolled across the top of my screen. Lena Crawford from Channel 9 requesting a follow-up. A morning news producer. Someone from a national radio program. The rescue had become a Christmas story, and Christmas stories spread fast. Thomas heard the notifications. Who's calling? Reporters. A pause. Oh. His voice in that moment was smaller than I had ever heard it, like something had punctured it. They're going to ask where you were, he said. I hadn't thought about that yet. I sat with it for a moment. The truth wasn't complicated. It wasn't scandalous. It was simply sad. A woman whose husband had asked her to leave her own home for Christmas Eve had spent the night at a shelter, driven home in a snowstorm, and pulled strangers out of a river. That was the whole truth. I haven't decided to talk to anyone yet, I said. I appreciate that. He paused. Karen, go be with your guests. Thomas. They already left. That surprised me. When? About 20 minutes after the news started. I didn't ask him to explain. I already understood. Some moments expose a person more completely than any speech could. Robert Harding had spent Christmas Eve watching his employee's wife rescue a family from a freezing river, the same employee who had sent that wife away to make the evening run more smoothly. There was nothing to say after that, no conversation that would have made it comfortable to stay. I hope you get some sleep, I said. So do I, Thomas said quietly. I set the phone on the nightstand. On the television, the footage played one more time. The red coat, the broken window, the little girl's arms around a stranger's waist. Outside the motel window, snow kept falling over an empty parking lot. Inside, I was a woman who had just spent Christmas Eve wishing a stranger's family could stay together, while her own had been quietly coming apart for longer than she'd admitted. I turned off the television. I lay down in the dark. And, to my genuine surprise, I slept. Christmas morning arrived as sunlight on fresh snow. For a few seconds between sleeping and waking, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the motel curtains and remembered everything in the particular fast order that memories arrange themselves on difficult mornings. My phone had finally stopped vibrating sometime before dawn. When I picked it up, more than 100 notifications waited. Messages from friends I hadn't spoken to in years, former colleagues, old neighbors. One stood apart. It was from Lena Crawford. Karen, I understand you've had a long night. I'm not looking for a dramatic headline. If you'd like to share your story, not just the rescue, but the person behind it, I'd be honored to listen. I set the phone down without answering and went to shower. After checking out, I drove to a small diner and ordered coffee and eggs and tried to feel like myself again. The waitress recognized me before my food arrived. You're her, she said, from the news. I smiled in a way that I hoped conveyed gratitude and also a preference for privacy. She refused to let me pay. I argued. She insisted. It's Christmas morning, she said. Let somebody be kind to you. I left an extra tip tucked under the saucer anyway. I called Lena Crawford back around noon. We met at a park near the river, no cameras, no crew, just Lena with a notebook and 2 cups of coffee from a drive-thru. She asked about my mother, about caregiving, about the work I'd done before I stopped working, about what had been going through my mind on that embankment. She never asked me to exaggerate. She never tried to steer the story somewhere dramatic. Then, near the end, she looked up from her notebook and asked, "What were you supposed to be doing last night?" I looked across the park. A father was teaching his daughter to feed ducks at the edge of the frozen pond. The little girl kept throwing the bread too hard and then dissolving into laughter when the ducks scrambled for it anyway. "I was supposed to be home," I said. Lena waited. "My husband was hosting his boss for Christmas." I paused. "I spent the night elsewhere." "Was that your choice?" I looked at the paper cup warming my hands. "No," I said. That single word carried 22 years inside it. Lena closed her notebook. "You don't have to say anything more than that." I know. Her article appeared online that afternoon. It wasn't a hero story. It was a story about kindness, about ordinary people choosing courage when no one required it of them. Near the end, she wrote one paragraph. Karen Mitchell said she had plans that fell through on Christmas Eve, which left her with an unexpected evening to herself. She spent part of it volunteering. She spent part of it driving. And she spent part of it climbing through a broken window into freezing water because she saw a child's hand pressed against the glass. "I didn't feel brave," she told me. "I just felt like someone had to go." She never mentioned Thomas by name. She never mentioned our marriage. She didn't need to. People filled in the space themselves. By evening, the article had moved well beyond Indiana. Comments poured in from people who had spent holidays alone in ways they had never chosen. Widows, caregivers, parents who had driven home from somewhere quiet on Christmas morning and cried in their driveways before going inside to make breakfast for their children. One comment stopped me cold. Sometimes the deepest wound isn't being hated. It's realizing someone found it easier to celebrate without you. I read it 3 times. Then I called my sister Diane. Diane opened the door before I had finished knocking. She didn't say I saw the news. She didn't ask what happened or whether I was okay or what my next step was going to be. She simply put her arms around me and held on, the way older sisters hold on when they have decided that questions can wait. Later that evening, while we were doing dishes together, she looked sideways at me. "What happens now?" I dried a bowl before answering. "I honestly don't know. Do you still love him?" I thought about that with the same honesty I had been trying to apply to everything else in the last 24 hours. "Love isn't the hard question," I said finally. "What is? Whether I can trust the person he became." Diane nodded. She understood. She didn't offer a solution, because there wasn't one, and she was too honest to pretend otherwise. Some marriages don't end because love disappears. They end because respect leaves first. And respect, unlike love, does not always find its way back. 3 weeks passed. I stayed at Diane's. I returned Thomas's calls when I was ready and didn't when I wasn't. I went back to the community center every Wednesday afternoon. Ruth had saved me a volunteer badge with my name on it, which made me laugh the first time I saw it. The rescue had brought an outpouring of donations, blankets stacked along one wall, a food shelf that overflowed twice before someone organized a second storage room. Families I had never met stopped by to say thank you. Children who had been in the shelter on Christmas Eve drew pictures that Ruth taped to the hallway wall. Life had become strangely full, not because of the news coverage, not because of the 100 messages I had received or the article that had spread further than I ever expected, because I had remembered something I had lost somewhere in the years of caring for my mother and keeping the house and waiting for my husband to look at me again. I still had a life of my own, a real one, not a supporting role in someone else's story. Mine. It was a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Christmas, when someone said my name near the shelter entrance. Quiet, uncertain. "Karen." I turned around. Thomas stood just inside the door. He looked different. Not older, exactly, just smaller. The confidence that had always preceded him into every room he walked, into that particular ease of a man who had spent years being successful and knew it was gone. He wasn't carrying flowers. He wasn't holding anything, actually. Both hands were in the pockets of his winter coat. "I asked Ruth if it would be all right for me to stop by," he said. I glanced toward the director's office. Ruth appeared briefly in the doorway, met my eyes, and then disappeared around the corner with the diplomatic efficiency of someone who had seen every variety of difficult conversation. "What are you doing here?" "Thomas, I wanted to tell you something without a phone between us." He took a breath. "I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to understand how I became someone who would ask his wife to leave her own home on Christmas Eve." I didn't say anything. I folded the coat I'd been sorting and waited. I kept telling myself it was one night. He looked at the floor, then back up at me. But it wasn't one night. It was every business dinner I put above being home. Every weekend I spent on email instead of asking how your day had gone. Every time I assumed you'd still be there tomorrow. So I didn't have to try today. The words landed honestly, not as an excuse, as recognition. "I didn't start losing you on Christmas Eve," he said. "I started much earlier than that." I looked at him for a long moment. Outside the community center windows, the January sky was pale and still. "What did Robert say?" I asked. Thomas exhaled. "He came into the office while I was picking up some files last week. The building was empty. He had a box of documents. He stopped when he saw me." He paused. "He said his wife hadn't stopped talking about you since Christmas night. He said what impressed her most wasn't the rescue." Thomas looked at me directly. "It was the fact that you never once blamed anyone, not in the interview, not in the article, not anywhere." I waited. "He told me he's managed people for almost 30 years, and he's learned something." Thomas's voice was quieter now. "He said the way someone treats the people who love them eventually becomes the way they treat everyone else." I recognized the weight of that sentence. "He told me to fix it," Thomas said, "before it was too late." "And what did you say?" I didn't say anything. He smiled, small and tired, because I realized he was right, and I didn't have an argument prepared for being right. I almost smiled back, almost. "I've already turned down the promotion they offered after New Year's," he said. That surprised me. "Why?" "Because I finally understood something." He looked around the room at the cots along the wall, the donated coats sorted by size, the children's drawings on the hallway bulletin board. I kept chasing a version of success that would never sit beside me when I was 80, that would never know my name the way you know it. A pause. "I've also been seeing a counselor, alone, for now." He looked at his hands. I needed someone to explain to me when I started treating achievement like it mattered more than kindness. I looked at him for a long moment. Not with anger. I had carried the anger long enough to know it was heavy and didn't keep me warm. With something more complicated than anger, with the particular grief of someone watching a person they love trying, finally, to become who they should have been before it became necessary. Thomas reached into his coat pocket. He held out a folded piece of knitted fabric. I recognized it immediately. My Christmas stocking, the one that had hung beside his over the fireplace every December for 22 years. The one I had left behind when I packed my single suitcase. "I couldn't look at the fireplace," he said quietly. I took it from him. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the storage box in the attic where we kept the holiday things. That smell more than anything else came close to undoing me the ordinary, domestic smell of a life that had been real and good and mine, before it began quietly coming apart. "I'm not asking you to come home today," he said. "I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to have this." I held the stocking in both hands. "I don't know what happens next," I said. "I know. I don't know if there's a home for us to go back to." "I know that too." He nodded once. "And I mean it when I say I understand, not just as a sentence. I actually understand." I believed him. That was new. He looked at me one more time, then he turned and walked back toward the entrance. At the door, he stopped. "I'm not waiting because I have nothing else to do," he said. "I'm waiting because I finally remember who I'm waiting for." Then he left. I stood in the middle of the community center holding my Christmas stocking, listening to the sound of the building around me, Ruth's voice somewhere down the hall, a child laughing in the gymnasium, the heater doing its reliable best against the January cold. For the first time since December 22nd, I cried. Not loudly, not with drama, just enough to acknowledge everything that had been carried. The following months arrived quietly, the way real change usually does. We didn't move back in together immediately. We started smaller coffee on Saturday mornings at a place neither of us had history with. Walks through the park, long conversations with our phones face down on the table. Sometimes we talked about our marriage. Sometimes we talked about nothing more consequential than the birds at Diane's feeder or the new sidewalk they were installing on Fletcher Avenue. Healing, I learned, rarely arrives as a moment. It arrives as accumulation, as ordinary afternoons layered on top of each other until one day you look back and realize the distance has closed without you noticing exactly when. In early spring, Thomas started coming to the community center on Saturdays. He didn't announce it. He didn't ask for credit. He showed up in work clothes and asked Ruth where she needed him. He painted hallways. He fixed the broken bookshelf in the children's reading room. He assembled a donated swing set in the side yard while 3 children watched from the window and offered increasingly specific instructions. One afternoon, I found him in the equipment storage room, repairing a folding table that had been waiting to be fixed since October. "You missed the volunteer lunch," I said. "I know." He tightened a bolt without looking up. "I wanted to finish this first." "You don't have to prove anything, Thomas." He set the wrench down and looked at me. "I know." He said it differently than he used to, without the easy confidence, without the assumption that being told something was the same as having done it. "I'm not proving anything. I just wanted to fix the table." A pause. "Someone told me once that real change doesn't begin with promises." He picked the wrench back up. "It begins with different habits, repeated every day." I stood in the doorway for a moment. "Someone smart told you that—" "My counselor." "You should listen to him." "I am." He smiled without looking up. I walked back into the hallway, and something shifted, quietly, in the way things shift when they've been slowly settling into a new shape for months, and you finally notice the outline. By the following Christmas, we were not the same people we had been. We were older, more careful with each other in the good way, the way that means you have learned what carelessness costs and decided it isn't worth it. The tree was up, the same artificial one, 15 years old and slightly uneven, because I had always fluffed the branches by hand, and Thomas always said no one would notice the difference. And I always said the same thing back. "I'll know." This year, before he hung my stocking beside his over the fireplace. Thomas paused. He held it for a moment, the knitted fabric, the little embroidered K in the corner that had faded slightly over the years. "I'm glad you're home," he said. I looked around the room. The tree, the lights, the wreath I'd made in November, the smell of dinner coming from the kitchen, Thomas standing by the fireplace in the charcoal sweater, the real laugh starting at the edges of his eyes. Home. I finally understood what the word actually meant. Not the place where your name is on the mortgage. Not the place where your belongings are stored. The place where your presence is never treated as an inconvenience. The place where someone is glad genuinely, simply, without agenda that you are there. "I'm glad too," I said. I've thought a lot about that Christmas Eve since then. About what it means that a woman who had been asked to leave her own home ended up being the person who ran toward a river in the dark. About what it means that the act of being useful genuinely, quietly useful, with no one watching and nothing to prove, turned out to be the thing that brought me back to myself. I think the lesson isn't dramatic. It's actually very simple. When you stop waiting for someone else to decide you're worth keeping, you discover you've been worth keeping all along. You just had to remember it yourself first. Let me ask you something directly before you scroll away. Have you ever been made to feel like an inconvenience by someone who was supposed to make you feel like home? Have you ever packed a bag, even a small one, because staying felt harder than leaving? Have you ever been the person who showed up for everyone else and then had to learn, slowly, how to show up for yourself? If any of that sounds familiar, drop it in the comments. Your story matters here. And if you want more stories about what real strength actually looks like, subscribe, not the dramatic, movie trailer kind of strength. The kind that packs one small suitcase, drives into a snowstorm, and quietly refuses to disappear. That's the kind worth talking about, and we have a lot more to share.